Hey everyone, welcome back to Miniature Painting 101, a series of videos where I teach you all about painting miniatures from start to finish and everything in between, asked for by you. You give me suggestions, I give you videos. Fair deal. This is part 83, specifically fur pelts. How to paint fur pelts with a bit of a gradient of color and a bit of texture on models. So we're going to use the Space Wolf Captain today because, or Space Wolf just leader, Wolfpack leader, but he has a lot of fur pelts on him, so we're going to use it to create a quick gradient of colors and a transition of colors and create some texture on that fur. So today we'll be using 3 colors. Actually, we'll be throwing a 4th color in later. So we'll be using XV88, Agrax Earthshade, and Ushabti Bone. Pretty straightforward color scheme. And so we'll start off with XV88. We'll thin it down slightly so that way we get a nice consistency and it doesn't obscure any of the details. Remember, you gotta keep the detail when you're painting fur because that's the point of it. It has a lot of texture to it, a lot of detail, and you want to preserve that detail. So thin down your paints, do nice thin layers, and that way it'll keep the detail alive. So I'm just quickly painting XV88 over the entire fur surface. As I said, just cover it, get a nice solid coverage. If you find that you put a little too thin of spots and areas, feel free to do a second coat where it needs before proceeding to the shading step. And I'm just doing the same thing to the front end. And as you see now, it's a complete nice coverage, solid coat. So now it's time to add a shade so we can get that fur texture into the model. So we're going to use Agrax Earthshade. Since we're using browns, it's a good idea to use a brown shade. So I just took the Agrax Earthshade straight from the bottle and applied it directly to the miniature. Feel free to thin it down if you want a bit more, a bit lighter in the recesses, but I just like to keep nice dark deep recesses when painting fur. And as you can see, just getting complete coverage over the area, and it's already bringing back that detail that we want to preserve in the model. Much like painting hair, it's tones and texture. So now I'm just applying the Agrax Earthshade to the front of the model. Bring out the details in those fur pelt areas. Now, if you really want to differentiate the inside of the fur pelt, I actually like to use Rakelin Flesh Shade, so I probably should have added that in, but I like to differentiate the front end, take the inside of the pelt from the outside, so that way I just do Rakelin Flesh Shade on the inside, which gives it a bit of reddish tinge. So now it's time to bring back the texture. So I'm going to start with XV88 once again, so there's a more gradual change from the recesses to the finest colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to just give the entire area a quick dry brush / overbrush of XV88, which will pick up on those raised areas and all the texture and bring it back to the fur pelts. As you can see, it's just building up that texture once again. And now for the following steps, I'm just going to add Ushabti Bone into the mix and dry brush upwards. So start at the bottom and work my way upwards, and we're going to build a gradual gradient from the lightest at closest to the paws towards upwards, which will be the darkest. So now I'm only going to go about 3/4 the way upwards. So as you can see now, I'm starting to build that gradient of color already. There's a bit of shadowing. And we're going to continue just doing this repeatedly with a little bit of Ushabti Bone added into the mix a little bit at a time. And that way we'll build up a nice gradual color gradient and a lot of texture in this fur. And you don't have to do it perfectly linear. I'm going to intentionally do it not, because fur on animals tends to not be perfectly linear. And with the gradient, it tends to be patchy. So I will intentionally build not a perfect gradient. I'll have some patchiness, some darker areas, some lighter areas in others, because that gives a more realistic tone. So once again, I'll add more Ushabti Bone into the mix, making it a 1-to-1 mix of now Ushabti Bone to XV88. Start at the bottom, work my way upwards. And as I said, the goal is not to create a perfect gradient of colors, because that just doesn't seem realistic to me. You can if you want, and it looks great too. I just like to keep more realistic with these tones, and I know that the animals don't really have a perfect gradient of color most of the time. So as you can see, there's a bit of a dark patch near the bottom. And that's great, because now if you miss areas intentionally, next time you go over it with a lighter color as well, it will create different tones along the entire fur pelt. So now I'm going to add Ushabti bone once again into the mix. So now it's a 1:2 mix of XV80 to Ushabti bone. And just keep going with this gradient of colors. And each time stopping further down than I did the previous step. So each step you need less and less paint on your brush and in your palette, and that way you save paint. I'm intentionally keeping the area below his fist darker than below his claws darker than the rest, because it will be shadowed. So I'm intentionally leaving it darker because it should be shadowed by his hand. So I'm creating a more of a zenithal appearance on it. And for the final step, I'm just doing Ushabti bone just straight by itself, and I'm just doing the very bottom. So as you see now, we've built up a bit of a gradient. I like at the very end of the paws, just the Ushabti bone by itself. It will dry slightly darker, but that way at the very end, it's just that really bright pop at the bottom. As you see now, there's quite a cool gradient of fur, and we have some nice texture. So I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom part of the front, but as I said, I'm going to keep most of the top part of this fur darker, because I want to intentionally leave it more shadowed by the claws. So you see now, the shadow, like the claws cover it perfectly, so that's why I want to keep it shadowed. And then finally, this is just an extra bonus step if you want. I like to paint the claws whenever I do fur pelts, and I like to use gray liner because it's dark macrame. Feel free to use a black if you want. I just like the dark macrame. So I'm going to now paint all the claws quickly with gray liner, which brings out the claws. So as I said, the optional steps are gray liner if you want to paint the claws, and Rayclin Flesh Shade if you want to differentiate the inside of the pelt from the outside. It creates a bit more reddish tone because it's a reddish brown shade. And I'm just going to take this gray liner, which is a nice thin down Reaper paint, and apply it nice over all the claws. And that's it. So now we have a nice painted up fur pelt. Looks great, has some gradient, some texture, and some realistic color tones. And I like the claws painted black or dark gray. And as I said, if you want a bit more differentiation, do a Rayclin Flesh Shade on the inside. And that's essentially fur pelts in a nutshell. So as always, thank you so much for watching this episode of Miniature Painting 101. I really hope you enjoyed it and learned a bit about painting fur. Stay tuned for next week's episode, part 84, just around the corner next week as always. But if you don't want to wait for next week, check out The Warp. Click on the link below for a free 14-day trial to my premium YouTube channel, where not only do you get to see the next 6 months worth of Miniature Painting 101 episodes, you'll get to see over 60 start-to-finish painting tutorials, battle reports, face-off episodes, an Airbrush 101 series, just some awesome wargaming content that you're going to love. So go check out The Warp. I think you'll love it. So stay tuned for more episodes. Until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting, everyone.